Waiting with the little red lights on, so we're now recording.
So yeah, thanks everyone for showing up. So one of the topics we wanted to queue up today was, closing USF 1.0 for 2022 here. And so we've kind of been, as folks know, been journaling the USF spec on GitHub. Thanks to Ravi for actually helping structure this document based on a lot of the um, the slim bootloader precedent. And so one of the things, we've had open here is, I think we've went through the YAML-based configuration. By reference, we have some of the FSP updates, which for USF this year looks like it'll align with the 2.4 spec, guidance on security hardening. And then one area that's kind of been under active development is the universal payload with the community. So, when we started with the .5, .7, it was principally hop-based. Moving to the .9, we added CBOR and the potential for that as a handoff structure. I think some of the concern at the time was the complexity of CBOR, lack of producer and consumer code and firmware. But the concept of this, quote, more self-describing data structure seemed to have some, technical momentum and interest, and was kind of been liaised by the core boot community. And to that end, Lin Chang has drafted some of his thoughts on the common payload specification. So I believe a couple meetings ago he presented on this work. And so I guess the real challenges I wanted to talk about in this forum is, since this work is still kind of in progress, what are folks' thoughts? I mean, one thing we could do with USF 1.0 is, since this FTP design maybe hasn't converged, we could leave present USF spec kind of hop based, and as we mentioned CBOR as an alternative, we can mention this as another alternative and point to it with an eye toward perhaps aligning on this in 2023. Kind of what are folks' thoughts? Sounds like we don't know if the full community here has accessed and been even had an opportunity to provide review comments into this document. Like Ravi, have you seen this specific version?
Not this specific version, Vincent. I have seen the previous versions. Yeah, so I'll take a look at this one.
Okay.
Vincent, can you please forward this document? I haven't seen this version.
Okay.
And to me, as you are browsing through the document, it really seems like it's duplicating text that's already in the USF main document. Is this correct?
Yeah, I hadn't done a deep review also, but it kind of does seem like it's kind of lifting material here, so it's almost like a kind of a fork, I guess, at this point. Yeah, and so I think that's the other, I guess, challenge here is what's the well, what's the um, what will we tell the community if we kind of have two variants of this similar information? Yeah, because in this one is kind of not world visible on GitHub or anything. So yeah, when Sheng was traveling through Seattle, I kind of talked to him, and I think some of the concern he expressed was, hey, the USF spec, it mentions things like FSP. Maybe the community would be too worried that it's too coupled to maybe Intel work. So doing it in a alternate venue to curate the content may, you know, may take some of the edge off it, which I, yeah, I don't, yeah, I mean, my hope is it's, you know, sufficiently licensed and in the open, and at some point it's posted somewhere where there's a sort of a community-based governance. So I'm not too religious about it, but right now it does seem, I agree with you, Jose, it is kind of confusing having, it's almost like two artifacts at this point. So yeah, I think that is a problem statement.
But so in terms of this document, I thought that the main contribution was the set of fields from this table that you're showing here, like the set of fields as in the mandatory minimum set of fields that need to be in the FTT that's passed from a payload to the next.
Yes,
Uh,
that was my hope, and in fact, what was hoping is just as in the USF spec, we have the table with the hobs and the CBOR at a third column, which would be, you know, how to fabricate the same with FDT and do a sort of a mapping exercise. But yeah, I think that's kind of the that's kind of the the hope. So yeah, what I let me do though is, since it sounds like this latest artifact may not be um, world visible to you guys or posted somewhere public, let me just post the link in the chat window. So yeah, so I think this is kind of my, I guess my big open for 1.0 is I, since we didn't really, you know, converge on this proposal yet either, I was thinking just to lock the USF 1.0 to say we're staying with Hobbes for now, but we add reference to this work in the USF spec as as a potential, and then maybe look toward early next year trying to converge, because it sure feels like it's going to be difficult to align with this, have updated POCs this quarter. That's kind of my feeling, but one, since folks haven't had a chance to see this doc, you know, maybe people need a chance to ruminate on that, but um, that's kind of where I was thinking. So, like Ravi, with governance of kind of the 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 upstream payload packages we have already, do you think that makes sense, or do you think, because I think our upstream work is aligned with the .9 today, correct? Like
Sure. Yep.
it is, okay. But yeah, I do see this as a kind of a weird thing, having this stuff getting forked like this. And you know, at the end of the day, if this is under community ownership and this is where folks want to go, USF pointing to this and this being the canon at some point, I think is fine. I mean, again, I don't think there's a, I think the key is to have this again somewhere public, have a permit, a license that's palatable to everyone, and then a governance model such that if people want to evolve or observe concerns with the data set, they have a venue and a platform to engage. But as to whether it has to live in one dock or the other, but yeah, I do see the concern you bring up, Jose, that if there's duplicate, that's just not good for anyone, because there's
I
no
mean,
source of truth. Yeah.
yeah, but don't interpret it as a concern. I was just a bit puzzled.
Oh, an observation. Yeah, yeah. No, but I could see as a developer concern that if I go repping the web and I see two variants of the same thing, it just, yeah, it just doesn't seem efficient. But given, and I think my feedback to Len Cheng when I chatted with him was that's kind of a good problem also, because that means stuff's written down. So worst case, we have bit of duplicate work, but the work is done, and then the problem is reconciliation. Maybe you know, merge one into the other. One references the other, but it implies the other quote exists. So the fact that he's fabricating something, I think, is personally a good thing. So yeah, but I definitely kind of on the horns of the dilemma on what to do near term, and kind of thinking do the disjunct of we have Hobbes, we expressed you could do Seaboard. Now we have a good expression of what FDT could be, with the complexity, of course, that this document kind of duplicates the USF doc a bit, and it's almost like there's a circular dependency that could come between these two. So it's a little weird, but yeah, I'm with you. I don't think it's a like a 911 concern. It's just I might take something that's already a nuanced effort and add another layer of complexity for people trying to engage. But again, for content, too much content rather than too little, and the good problem afterward will be just merging, reconciling, as distinct from not having enough content and being conceptual, not having stuff written down or not having POCs. So yeah, that's kind of one aspect of going to the 1.0 I wanted to bring up, and then I think there are a couple other parts of the USF spec, like I think the runtime chapter was a little light, so asked Ankit and an Intel to at least update some of the work he's been doing in that area. But those were going to be kind of no real substantive changes beyond that. But this was a kind of a technical open I had. I wanted to kind of voice with you guys and get your feedback. So were you able to open the Google Doc link now I shared, or is it not world visible?
I don't have the required permissions yet, but I did ask.
Okay, so he's not made it public.
So one question on the data structure that you're showing here. So of course you said that the other alternative or the initial proposal was to go with just Hobbes as defined in the PI spec, I assume. Is there a mapping between the standard Hobbes that exists today and the fields that are being proposed for this FDT? Or are they entirely detached?
Yeah, so I think this is the canonical ones we thought we would need for USF. And then I could have sworn there was a table that compared, here we go, here's the table. Yeah. So yeah, so in the USF spec, the Hob data structure that he observed. So yeah, this is, if I recall, and Ravi can correct me, this is where we were, as we did the evaluation of Hob to Seaboard. The hope here was this FTT exercise would append a third column, and we could essentially say if there's already an FTT type for it, or if not, what it would look like. And so we would have kind of a correspondence such that if people are evaluating FTT, they can look at the existing art, which is the C type of Hobbes, what it would look like fabricated as a C-bore, and then FTT would be kind of the third column. So I think he might have been doing this exercise, but he just did the FTT variant in his doc. Okay.
But I think I think it's fine if you have the mapping to Seaboard. Then I think it's simple to extrapolate that the Seaboard column can be used for FTT as well.
Yeah, I think that's, but yeah, that's yeah, kind of the exercise.
But one question there is, I wanted to understand whether the key column are this Are these fields from hubs that currently exist, or are these kind of GUIDed or hubs, so non-standard hubs?
Oh, yeah. So yeah, I don't know if we've annotated which of these already exist in the PI spec. I believe, Ravi, aren't all of these new things? The ones that exist in the PI spec were listed earlier. These are ones that we created as part of the UPL, or were some of these already standard hubs? I don't remember.
Some of these
Remember.
are already standard. Yeah, I think, but you are right. So we probably should annotate them if it's part of the PI spec or if it has been added new. I don't think we did that.
Okay, so it's a mix. Gotcha. Makes sense, because yeah, IO and memory space kind of seem kind of fundamental. But yeah, okay. So I think that would be another valuable exercise as part of this, because again, my fear is not assessing the new proposal in the context of existing. It's almost like a do-over, some of the discussions, and so yeah. And again, if this exercise, yeah, I think it definitely would be better having it all in one table. I agree. So yeah, so I think that's kind of where we're at. I think the hope was this FTT stuff would, you know, have had a steeper arc of progress, but yeah, personally, I just don't feel it's landed yet. So it's can't really, and I'm always loath to encourage the upstreams to, you know, pivot. Like the CBOR, definitely was POC status. It feels like the FTT is still there and it's not ready to. Doesn't seem like we have universal agreement or acquiescence yet. But I think it feels like it's trending well given the existence of the device tree compiler. The EDK2 embedded package has DT support. Sounds like U-boot is kind of DT native. Um, it has the least friction from an ecosystem. It's just not quite there yet.
Does the-
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Vincent.
Yeah, no, the only other point I guess I'd bring up is, we could say we still have a couple weeks, was hoping, to lock this stuff in early December. We could press the foot to the gas pedal and, encouraging that we want to accelerate the reviews and try to embrace FTT this quarter, but it just feels like it'd be an unnatural push. Well, that's my 2 cents, but yeah, encouraged to hear, interested to hear your feedback, Jose and Ravi and Mickey.
I don't really have feedback on the timeline and what's feasible, but I wanted to ask you, since you've talked about the FTT support in EDK2 and U-boot. I was wondering whether CBOR parsing is already supported by EDK2 as well.
No, I think the CBOR library we added was from the an IoTivity. Is that or I forgot the name of the initiative, but it was some embedded um, it's an embedded effort. So, and if I recall, when we did the oh, files, that's members. When we did our group IO thing here, do we have files? Yes. We did the CBOR payload overview, SBL, a new data format. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think when we did it, if I recall the POC, oh, I don't know. Maybe he didn't mention which library he used here. But yeah, I think it was an imported library. It's not native. And then the DT support that's actually an EDK2 was the embedded package. That was, I forgot the origin, but that was, I think, done by some early. I don't recall the origin.
Okay.
Oh, but Nano. Oh, that's the protobuf stuff. Yeah, so this would be a place to go find it, but yeah, it definitely wasn't using upstream support. Okay, yeah, it looks like he fabricated the lib here. But yeah, I don't. But it's not definitely not upstream, and I don't believe we have any use cases for CBOR yet. I know there's some TCG sort of manifest, some formats coming that may need it, but I don't know if we need in the box parsing even for CBOR though. So yeah, I don't know of any use cases. So this was an import. So yeah, between that and then having to train people on CBOR and yeah, seem to have better technical efficacy, but from a open source community culture, it might be a little bit of a shock for some folks, but I think that was kind of part of the adjudication around this. Yeah, like I said, and again, USF 1.0, the timeline is just to sort of try to, converge on some stability, but it doesn't mean that we can't do a USF 1.1 or something and align implementation practice against the 1.1. Yeah, the other thing, yeah, talking to Lee Chang, yeah, he also, brought up some good questions on the versioning schemes and some of the other fields, and so I probably need to transpose some of his. I think he might have put some of his questions into his doc, and so I think it's valuable to probably maybe motor through his doc to because I think there's some good critiques of UPL payload that can probably make UPL healthier longer term also, but yeah, it's kind of weird liaising it through a separate Google Doc, but again, my view of the world is as long as progress is happening, and then again, but maybe this tech readiness is just something that's going to take a little longer this year, and want to kind of at least have some initial stability milestone for the 1.0. But yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to queue up as a kind of a discussion today, and then if folks thought there was any other things that needed to get elaborated or fleshed out in the present USF spec, whether it's configuration or any of the other sections, definitely open to that as feedback today also. But again, the goal was kind of at least you know where our present practices sort of call that 1.0, and then still if we could catch the FTT, that would have been great, but it just seems like there's more here. Community review study, I think building that ontology tables really important to compare all the different fields. Yeah, Ravi, sounds like on this one too, right? We should even do what's existing in the PI spec, what's not. That's a cleanup we can do too, potentially before 1.0. Maybe open a GitHub issue on that.
Yeah, sounds good, Vincent. Yeah, we should do that.
Cool. So yeah, and yeah, maybe I'll open a separate GitHub issue on FTT work, and I'll put that link into GitHub because yeah, I kind of encourage that this stuff is kind of just put all out there in the open. I don't think if someone has input rather earlier than later, so I just want to kind of socialize that effort.
On the USF documents, Vincent, in the security section, there are a lot of sections, subsections there that briefly provide some high-level requirements. But I have a question on the cryptographic agility section, so 5.1.6. For the different supported algorithms, is it true that there are some algorithms specific to some geographies that may not possibly be listed here? And also for the different algorithms, do we have a standard defined unique ID to refer to them, or is this just enumerating the different algorithms that can be supported?
Yeah, so it's a good observation. So yeah, I think SM3 is definitely China specific. This has the actual China standards. So yeah, I think right now we were sort of just saying these are the class of algorithms, but as to whether there's like an OID or a GUID, like a software, kind of visible artifact or enumeration, is that kind of what you're
Yes.
wondering about? Okay.
And my question was more like, is this just an enumeration of the possible algorithms, or are we really making this discoverable somehow? And if we are we using some numerical ID or OID to refer to them?
Yeah, I think it's more just the former. It's not to be software discoverable, and if we were, I don't know if we'd want to create our own namespace around that, given the plurality of others that exist. Yeah, we were kind of saying, for hey, USF to be this sort of modernized firmware, here's the class of crypto you should be observing. But yeah, I don't think it was from a software perspective creating any new enumeration mechanism for software discoverability. But that's yeah, that's actually an interesting observation that maybe for things like payloads or others, how does this get mapped to the other work product in this spec? So yeah, I can. That's a good open. I'll talk to G1 and see his thoughts. In the ATF world, like your TBBR and stuff, is there any software constructs around this, or are these just more guidance around what's supported or required for these different profiles, like the PSA and the TBBR client?
I'd need to check about the TBBR. I think that document was recently renamed, but I'm not entirely sure whether it mandates any particular hashing function. Although it may assume one. I think that yes, PSA, the PSA documentation does introduce some notions about cryptographic functions and how you can describe them. But having said that, I'm not an expert there, so I would need
Gotcha.
to.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think one of the challenges we're trying to wrap our arms around too is that, with USF, given it can be that kind of admixture of different providers for each layer, how to kind of provide some overarching guidance, but if this guidance is not like expressed anywhere or software visible, what does it even mean? So yeah, I think it's a fair question, because I think the ideal would be, for example, I think even payloads could be sort of self-describing in a sense and say, this is, maybe something like a capabilities. This is what I can do. Perhaps some of these need to be, since the platform layer and the payload can be different producers, maybe this is a data type that needs to be passed through such that you can have continuity of verified and measured boot given a payload producer and a platform layer, a POL could be different. We may need these to be fabricated in a way that if one layer is discovering the other layer built by someone else, does it know its capabilities? And or if it's activating one of these encipherments, it can tell the next layer, this is what I did, such that you don't do a 512-bit RSA verify of the payload, but then the payload does a 8K RSA verify of the next layer. That would be kind of silly. But when people put these tinker toys together, maybe that would be a valuable data item to have, because we are again kind of composing these different layers from potentially different communities and or different entities. So yeah, I'll take that action. That's actually a good one. And I think the actions I'll probably just even turn into a GitHub issue just to remind myself so it doesn't create a new list of things to do that I lose track of. But yeah, no, I think that's actually a very fair question, and kind of that's again why we kind of did the huge survey. And then I think we have a similar thing about mitigations, is if one layer is doing a mitigation, it'd be great if we could express perhaps that to the next layer, but a lot of these are sort of just best practices right now. Um, but yeah, that's kind of where we're at in the we're at in the in the in the in the infrastructure here. And then one of the things we've also added is if these payloads get produced, say by an entity, could that entity publish these manifests such that you knew where it came from, who was the producer, and you could have the hash, so that if you were worried about supply chain, this
Is
is
this for the software bill of materials use case or compilation? Is this somehow standardized?
yeah, that's its own kind of crazy space right now. So yes, it is part of the bill of material works. It's a firmware entity, but the SBOM spec with the SPDX identifiers, and there's quite a few different entities in play, and so we sort of, for this effort, took a subset of these activities coming out of the trusted computing group, and to complement existing sort of measurement work that's happening, and these manifests build on top of that. But I won't claim that all the um, comprehends all the different SBOM um, requirements coming in. In fact, I think the other formal standards groups like the TCG and even the UEFI forum are talking about maybe having to have some engagement on what SBOM ultimately means for those communities. So we definitely cleaved a subset, but the subset was things that have come out of the trusted computing group that essentially provide an explication of existing measurements. So we've been doing measured boot for years, but if you look at the PCRs, they're kind of the resources in the TPM that record the hashes of the code data. They're kind of semantically opaque, meaning you see the hash, but you don't kind of know what, why. And so what these manifests are things that if you do a TCG style platform, you can publish to say, hey, it's like typically the universal payload, since it's platform code, might just show up in PCR platform configuration register 0. It's
Right,
just
but
a magic hash. So this is a way you can introspect and say, ah, that hash actually matches what the supplier said it was supposed to be, and so it just gives semantics on top, but it doesn't claim that it's all the S-bomb requirements floating around in the world.
so that's an
Comprehends.
interesting. It's an interesting observation about the mapping between different firmware components and the PCRs. I assume that for the Intel architecture, there was kind of a de facto industry-wide understanding of which firmware components are measured into which PCRs. But then
Right. Right.
I guess you're saying otherwise.
I think for if I recall the way it's written in the PC client, I think it's abstracted to the point of what's platform code, what's OS loader. So if it's platform code, there's a concept of like a firmware blob. So I think ARM, RISC-V, Power should all be able to support it. Now, what may be missing are there's certain measurement events or data types that might be unique to an architecture. Like there's a record type, like called microcode. Well, a pure RISC platform doesn't have microcode. Maybe the equivalent would be the secure world binary, the machine mode code on RISC-V. So yeah, it's, I think there's some data types that are kind of arc neutral, but there may be some types that for different architectures that maybe would merit adding to the measurement types that might not be there. But yeah, I think the measured boot libraries and talking to the TPMs, that's pretty architecture neutral. And in fact, these formats even, yeah, you could build one of these cosoids for anything. Yeah, this is just an instance that's unique for USF. So people who want to introspect on this particular binary can do it. But yeah, it's been a while since I've done the PC client working group and the TCG and the EFI platform spec, and to know if there's like there's a record type for measuring SM bias tables, ACPI tables. There's a record type for what we call non-host platforms. So if you have an SoC microcontroller, you can record the hash of it into the PCRs. It's kind of a generic ontology, if I remember. But yeah, we definitely, so again, part of USF too is we didn't want to invent new stuff. It's really leverage extant industry standards, but maybe since the UPL is a unique artifact of this work, create this definition. But yeah, we'll definitely follow up on the algorithm types and whether there's anything that is or should be software discoverable on that. That's good feedback.
A couple of questions on this on one of the tables in 5.1.6. So two questions, and probably the first one is more of a curiosity. You're referencing the TBSA for M profile. I think, and again, probably I should know this, I think that there's also TBSA for DA profile, and that may be more applicable if it exists. The M profile architecture is really just deeply embedded 32-bit. Generally
I see.
doesn't only
Gotcha.
run RTOS's sort of OSs.
Okay. Yeah, that's actually a good catch. It's the impression that link, and then looks like the UFI spec. We got to bump that also. Um, yeah, and I don't think we're gonna. And I know Microsoft has publicly expressed they want us to move to 4K with UEFI 210. But I don't know if that's something we want to journal here or find by reference. So yeah, I can follow up on those, on that one and this other, the UEFI cleanup also.
Also, another question on, since you've touched the UEFI spec reference, you're also referencing the OCP secure boot. And probably this is a entirely side question. Does the OCP secure boot redefine secure boots versus what's defined in the UEFI spec, or is it just building on top of the UEFI?
Yeah, I'd have to check on this. This is, I think it's beyond UEFI even, because I think even the new Calyptra spec references this. So I think it's kind of, if you do secure boot, here's a minimum set of capabilities. So think of it as like an overarching, any secure boot shall meet this criteria. So it's, yeah, it's more general than UEFI secure boot. I think a core boot, Chrome verified boot would suffice. I think some vendor specific secure boots that are hardware based. I think it's a more general requirements document. So yeah, so I think, yeah, it's definitely more than UEFI. And I don't know if they even read in on UEFI here now. And so, yeah, I don't know if we've even done an audit to say we're we're OCP secure boot um, aligned. I haven't checked the latest, but yeah, think of this as the data center guys are curating their own set of specs. And this one is, if you do secure boot to setting, just like the open system firmware, they're saying if you do firmware for OCP, it shall meet these high level requirements like publicly redistributable infrastructure to rebuild that may include binaries, right? That things that match to how vendors have boot ROMs or FSPs today, but it's not specific to any given workflow. So yeah, that's where these guys are at. But yeah, it's definitely hard keeping up with all these different efforts because they also have a recovery set of requirements. They're doing something now on transferable ownership because if you decommission a server, they want to have the ability to transfer ownership to another party. So say the CSP is decommissioning, 3 years from now, their Xeons or Epics or Amperes, Hoppers, whatever, right? Instead of putting them in a file, what do they call it? A junkyard, a landfill. There's vendors that recommission hardware, resell it. One of the challenges is, and it reads on this secure boot, in fact, is a lot of the ownership models. If you um, assert ownership by fuse hashes and other things, and it's the vendor's identity, but you want to transfer ownership so someone else could take this ostensibly open firmware and put their own on. How do you quote transfer ownership? Do you use the fuses such that you leave some key slots for the successive owners? Do you have an ownership model not based on fuses? So there's quite a few and the OCP security work stream, they're creating a lot of work product around this. So if you do secure boot, if you do ownership, if you do recovery, and then underneath that, a lot of folks participate to make sure their specific implementations can adhere to it, or they evolve their implementations to align with what OCP is recommending from a platform construction layer. And then, of course, first party technology from OCP ostensibly will follow their own guidance. So again, like their Calyptra root of trust, they announced, by design should follow the secure boot guidelines, be recoverable in the same sense, support this ownership transfer model.
And so in the ownership transfer model, Vincent, I guess that's the requirements that OCP is creating is the number of reusable.
I don't remember the latest, and I think that's one embodiment. I don't recall if they get prescriptive on that. I don't remember. I'd have to double check. And in fact,
No.
yeah, you bring up a
No,
good point.
But
Oh, go
that's the
ahead.
number of fuses. One thing is about the number of fuses that you can use to link your keys into supporting multiple owners throughout the system lifetime. But the other question is, are they trying to standardize software interfaces for key enrollment, or do they assume that that's always going to be kind of platform specific or vendor specific?
Today, I don't believe they are. I think they're like writing these high level requirements, and I think there's opportunities for other communities to do that. But but even the OSF work stream where they talk about firmware specifically, they don't even talk about APIs. They say, if you are doing this firmware, this is, again, make it available. It's a model of behavior, but not specifics on interfaces. So I haven't seen these OCP work streams drilling into interfaces now. I think it's opportunities for these open communities, whether it's a USF or other upstreams, to, if we see alignment needs there or the more formal specs, like, hey, EFI, you have a key management service protocol. That would be great for this use case, or maybe you need a key enrollment protocol there. But yeah, OCP is not driving software interfaces that I've seen so far between these two work streams, at least. Open system firmware and the security work stream. They're just building these requirements, and then the real challenge for vendors is if they have existing infrastructure.
So just a quick time check here. We have about 5 minutes left.
Oh, thanks, Mickey. I lost track of time. But yeah, but I think it's good for, since we're doing some of these specs by reference, why we are, and I think putting some sort of language around what the intent is of these references, I think would be good, and then making sure they're complete. So yeah, I think that's the clean read of this, Jose, helps a lot. Again, we want to make it so folks roll up and know why they're reading. Is this just encouraged, informative? Is this something that is software discoverable? Is this something that, why are we riffing on this stuff? So yeah, take that feedback. Cool. So yeah, any other things we want to catch for today's discussion? Yeah, the biggest one at my top of mind was the whole, how do we compose with thoughts on the FTT work, and not so much worried about where it's written so much as, are we doing the right thing technically to help converge on a technical understanding of what might be the best approach. And so yeah, get the alternate doc out there, at least you guys take a look and then, um, and I even talked to Shang, it's like, hey, if you don't want to host this on USF, maybe host it somewhere publicly. And I think, um, sitting with him, we even talked about another GitHub called Common System Firmware, which I think the world will probably go crazy if there's another acronym, but just put it somewhere publicly at some point that we can lock down and get some review and alignment. But want to share that sentiment, and then also yeah, collect some of the feedback before we drop a 1.0 label this year on the doc. Okay, yeah, I guess if there's nothing else, maybe we can break a little early so folks can take a deep breath before their next meeting.
Thank you, Vincent. I'm gonna go ahead and stop recording now.